We left Israel, who used to be Jacob, with his 10 sons in Canaan. Israel was grieving because he thought that his son Joseph had been killed by a lion when actually he'd been thrown into a pit and sold to a caravan heading towards Egypt. Now, while Joseph was in Egypt, we begin, Judah, Jacob and Leah's 4th son, and his wife had 3 sons. The oldest one, named grew up and took a wife named Tamar. Was a bad fellow and he died young. The custom, designed to keep family lines intact, was for the younger brother to have relations with his older brother's widow. The 2nd son, named Onan, had relations with Tamar, but he ejaculated on the ground, so there was no pregnancy. God was upset about this practice, so Onan died young too. Judah told Tamar he'd send his youngest son, Shelah, to her as soon as he was mature. But Judah didn't send him because he was afraid Shelah would die too. Later, Judah's wife passed away, and Judah had to go through the town where Tamar lived on the way to shear some sheep. Tamar realized Judah wasn't going to send the youngest son to her, so she dressed like a prostitute along Judah's route of travel. When Judah saw her, he wanted to have sex with her. He wasn't carrying enough money, so he left his identification seal with her to hold until he sent her a sheep for payment. Tamar became pregnant by Judah. When Judah sent the sheep to pay for the service, no one in town knew of any prostitute. Judah figured he'd have to get a new identification seal and put the matter behind him. About 3 months later, word got to Judah that his former daughter-in-law, Tamar, had become a prostitute and had gotten pregnant. He said, "Bring her to me and we'll burn her at the stake." When they came to take her, she said, "The man who made me pregnant is the man who owns this identification seal." Needless to say, Tamar was spared, and when she gave birth, she bore twins. It was a breech birth. The first hand came out, and the midwife tied a thread to it. That hand went back in, and the other twin was born first. They named him Perez. The child with the thread on his hand was named Zerah. Meanwhile, in Egypt, Joseph was sold by the caravan to an Egyptian official named Potiphar. God blessed everything Joseph touched. Pretty soon he was in charge of Potiphar's entire estate. Potiphar was doing so well by Joseph that he stopped worrying about anything that had to do with his business. With Joseph in charge, all he concerned himself were things like what to have for supper. Joseph was a very handsome man. Potiphar's wife wanted relations with Joseph. Joseph always turned her down. One day he was in the house while no one else was there, and Potiphar's wife couldn't restrain herself any longer, and she tried to rape Joseph. She ripped his shirt as Joseph escaped and left the house. She told her husband that Joseph had tried to rape her. Joseph was thrown into Pharaoh's jail, and in jail, Joseph gained alliance with the warden by helping him. Soon, once again, Joseph was running everything, but he was still a prisoner. Later, 2 of Pharaoh's helpers were thrown into jail. One was a baker and the other served drinks to Pharaoh and his family. After these 2 fellows had been in jail a few weeks, they both had dreams. When Joseph saw them the next day, they were distraught. He said, "What's the problem, guys?" And they explained the vivid dreams, and neither of them knew what his dream meant. Joseph said, "No problem, gentlemen. My God can help me interpret them for you." Here's the cocktail server's dream. He saw a vine in front of him with 3 branches on it. It had succulent grapes, so he squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and served it to him. Joseph interpreted the dream like this: the 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, you're going to be out of here and back serving Pharaoh. If you could speak well to Pharaoh of me, I'd sure appreciate it." When the baker saw how good the interpretation was for the server, he asked Joseph to interpret his dream. He had a basket on his head with 3 loaves of bread for Pharaoh. Birds were eating the bread out of the basket. Joseph's interpretation: "You got 3 days before Pharaoh cuts your head off. He'll hang you from a tree and birds will come and eat your corpse." In 3 days, all happened just as Joseph had predicted. The server went back to work and the baker hung on a tree. The server didn't say anything to Pharaoh about Joseph. 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream. In his dream, he was standing by the Nile River. 7 healthy cows were coming out of the river. After them, 7 skinny cows. The skinny cows ate the fat cows. He woke up, then fell back to sleep and had a second dream. In it, he saw 7 ears of grain come up on a single stalk. They were plump and good. Then 7 ears of thin and scorched grain came up. They ate the plump ears. He woke up again and realized it was all a dream. Pharaoh was worried about his dreams, so he sent for his wise men and magicians. They had no idea what the dreams were about. The cocktail server finally remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about Joseph's proven ability to interpret dreams. Joseph was immediately sent for, cleaned up, and brought before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said, "I hear you can interpret dreams." Joseph answered, "I can't, but God certainly can." And Pharaoh then told Joseph the dreams. Joseph answered, "Both dreams are together because God is telling you what will certainly happen. There are to be 7 good years for Egypt and for crops, and then there will be 7 bad years. You had 2 similar dreams because God is showing you how surely these things will be. My advice is, put a wise person in charge of this situation. Take full advantage of the 7 good years. Stockpile all you will need for the bad years. Then Egypt will come through beautifully." Pharaoh was very impressed and said, "Who better could supervise Egypt's food supply than you? God showed you the meaning of my dreams. Joseph, I'm putting you in charge. You are now second in command of Egypt. Nobody raises a foot around here unless you say so. Here's my special ring, which I am giving to you." Then they took Joseph out and dressed him up like an important Egyptian, which he now certainly was, and paraded him around in a chariot. All the Egyptians bowed low to Joseph. He was 30 years old at the time. Joseph took an Egyptian wife and moved into a wing of the palace. He traveled all over Egypt, managing the storage of food and for the famine. The year before the famine came, Joseph had 2 sons by his Egyptian wife. He named the first Manasseh and the second Ephraim. There was so much extra food in Egypt it was impossible to inventory all of it. After 7 good years, the famine came and the people started to cry to Pharaoh for food. Pharaoh simply handed the matter over to Joseph, and because the famine was worldwide, Joseph was selling the whole world bread. Well, I like the fact that Joseph woke up in jail and woke up and went to sleep in a feathered bed. That's one of my favorite parts of Scripture. But yeah, the story continues, and Joseph is, gosh, he's a hero. But Abraham, we'll have a patriarch scorecard at the end of Genesis. But Joseph's really cool, and but the story's cool, and I'm sure we're close to 10 minutes. So see you on number 10.